Happy stoppage time! It's Friday, August 23rd. Just sounds weird saying that. I can't believe we're already at the end of August, pretty much. September, October, November, December. Wow, right? 2024, whipping by. Lots on my mind this week, but I'm going to kind of boil it down into a theme that has presented itself no matter what I have been dealing with or talking about. And the big picture kind of things that have been on my mind: politics, policy, and progress. But the theme that underlies all of these things is this idea of just communication and talking to each other. Talking to each other about our similarities, talking to each other about our differences, talking to each other about the problems that we face, talking to each other about the solutions that are possible or might be possible to the problems that we face, just talking to each other. It's presented itself repeatedly in almost everything that I've been dealing with or going through this week in my business or in my personal life. And I'll just give you a couple examples, but why the three P's have been on my mind all week. It's the Democratic National Convention going on this week here in the United States, which is a political party program event that basically, it's like a big conference for a week that basically helps pick and finalize the candidacy of a particular candidate, and in this case for president and vice president. And so that's been going on. I'm a politics junkie. Everybody knows that. Most people know where my political belief system falls, my values are. And so it's no surprise that I'm interested in what's being said this week. And that's mostly because I'm interested in the policies that underlie the politics or the politicians. And I'm interested in the policies that underlie the politics of the politicians because I'm fundamentally interested and driven by progress. It's why, as I travailed across Latin America and the US over the last 10 years, helping build entrepreneurial economies, helping mentor and encourage young entrepreneurs, progressively both my social graph of relationships and community as well as my real life graph of relationships and community in my network became ever more younger. Because fundamentally I am just driven by progress. So if you wanted to invert the title of today's short episode here with you, it would really be progress, policy, and politics. And so what theme that has been coming up, and I'm going to walk around with you a little bit because my apartment plays a role in as a character in today's show, but what theme that has been kind of presenting itself consistently throughout the course of my week this week in my coaching work, in my work of us managing the Storytellers Company and our business, and then also just in my politics and then in my personal life in a very specific way. I'm going to see if you can get a sense of it here. There's a park behind my house. Okay, you can get that sense. So here in my still empty apartment, which will be empty for a while because progress takes time and you got to be patient. But this theme of communication and talking to each other, right, is we just don't talk to each other enough. And so problems that we have exacerbate, right, themselves. They become worse. They fester, if you wanted to use kind of the wound analogy. And then they're made to be worse, and then our positions on these problems become intractable, right? We become kind of affixed to our point of view, and our point of view just kind of continually bubbles itself inside of our brains or just the one or two people around us that we may talk to most regularly. We create these little echo chambers, and then sometimes we use social media to kind of expand the footprint of those echo chambers, but those echo chambers are still just echo chambers, which ironically, there's a bit of an echo right here in between my kitchen and my living room because there's no furniture and there's no carpet in here yet. It's hardwood floors, you can see. There we go, right? So we don't talk to each other enough. Right? And this has come up in my coaching this week with one of my coaching clients that I have, where my consistent retort to all of those interested in how to solve this particular problem or how to deal with this particular situation or how to build a bridge between themselves and this particular person, my answer has continually been, have you gone to talk to him? Have you gone to sit down and talk to him? Did you go talk to him about this? Have you talked to this person about that? Have you brought that issue back to that person and said, like, hey, let's talk about how to deal with this. Let me help you understand. In this particular case, it's a new person in an existing company, right? And the answer is almost universally no. Right? No, I haven't. Well, okay then. Like, if that's true, then you have before I can even give you any advice. First of all, there is no magic wand advice I can give you. But before I even could do that and talk about how you could progress, right? You're limiting yourself. You're limiting the potential for that problem to be solved, for that issue to be tackled. And so if we're not talking to each other in our personal and professional relationships, we're limiting our own potential. We're limiting the potential of the problems that we face at work or in our businesses or in our friendships or in our relationships at home. We're limiting the ability to solve those. And so why is that on my mind? Like, why has that presented itself kind of as an example this week? Because as I watch us talk about our politics, right, there's this kind of divided camp approach to politics. And this is very particularly true in the US, but it's also true everywhere else outside the US now. Almost every country with any kind of pluralistic democracy or 2 or 3 party democracy has the same types of issues that we face. And everybody has kind of decamped to like putting on their team jersey and saying like, I root for this team and this team only. And frankly, the only way that I'm ever satisfied is if that other team completely fails. Like, I want us to go 16-0 on the season, and I want them to go 0-16. And that, of course, is just wholly unrealistic way to build a business, to build a community, to live life. And now you're in my bedroom, which thankfully I'm a pretty neat person, so the apartment is fairly clean and organized. But there's my empty bedroom. But again, if we're not talking to each other about the things that plague our cities, our neighborhoods, our towns, our countries, culturally, infrastructure-wise, policy-wise, like across the basic spectrum of things that we require to live a stable, healthy life. If we're not talking to each other about those things, we can never come to kind of a sense or a consensus of what everybody's interests are, and then we can never kind of prioritize and deal with the things kind of in the order of how they can be dealt with, nor can we ever have like realistic understandings of how long it takes to solve real problems, right? So again, if we're not talking to each other, then the person across the way is just a person wearing a different color uniform, and then therefore we think that we're supposed to zero-sum game win, and they're supposed to zero-sum game lose, and that's just nonsense. Like, that's not any free thinking, democratic, free market economy / democracy such as ours in the United States. Like, no country can function when you're just pointing at the other team and you're saying, like, well, for me to win, you have to lose. And no neighborhood can thrive when you look across the street and you think about your neighbor and you say, like, well, for me to succeed and thrive, my neighbor needs to lose, right? Like, that's just never the way that it's worked throughout the history of mankind. And it's, by the way, not the way that it works now. We're just in a weird anomaly in the grand scheme of history, and where we've decided that it's easier for us to not talk to each other. It's easier for us to just saddle up with our particular team. It's easier for us to just get ours and distrust, disbelieve, disconnect from everybody else because no one else understands what I need and what I want out of this game, and therefore I'm just going to get mine or mine for my family. And if you're not in the collective spirit, like, this whole thing eventually just fails and breaks down. And so a small example of that this week, small but kind of an extreme example. This is my little hallway, by the way. Bathroom, yeah, nice. Closets. Happened out of these windows in this park this week. So this park in my neighborhood presents a unique problem. And let's call it a situation. It's because it's not a problem in a persistent way that affects me on a daily basis, but it is a problem in the overall scheme of kind of societal structure, right? And that is that because we have a homelessness crisis in our country, and in certain cities and certain states more pronounced than others, and here in Los Angeles County and Los Angeles City, more pronounced than some. New York City has more homeless people than we do in Los Angeles, but New York City has more social government housing, and so therefore does a better, more effective job of temporary shelter, temporary housing for their homeless population than we do here in Los Angeles, and so therefore we have a higher number of people that live on the streets. And those people are my neighbors. Literally, in the case of my neighborhood, I could tell you by face, I don't know their names, but I could tell you by face, the stories of the people that I have seen that are unhoused, and I refer to them as my unhoused neighbors. And so this week, in a random moment, very random moment, this past weekend, one morning I opened up these big, beautiful windows right here that you see actually in my kitchen, my dining room. I opened them up because these are some gorgeous 1920s like bay windows, and they open both sides. And so I opened them up across the spectrum of my apartments. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 of them. And I opened them all up, and I turned on some music, and not loud enough for me to enjoy, but not loud enough for people to hear outside. And then I was cleaning my apartment. And at some point, I was cleaning this section of the apartment that's right here by the window. I heard somebody say, "Hey, good morning." And I looked out, and it's one of my unhoused neighbors, or as someone might lazily say, like, it's a homeless guy, right? And I said, "Good morning," back to him. And he's kind of shuffling around in the leaves down there in the grass underneath the tree. And he's by himself at that particular moment in that particular morning. And he says, "What are you doing?" And I said, "Oh, I'm cleaning my apartment." I was like, just normal weekend routine, like cleaning the apartment. I was like, not much stuff in here. I just moved in, but just kind of keeping it clean. That's a hobby, a habit of mine. And he's like, "Yeah, I hear you. That's probably a good thing to do, huh?" I was like, "Yeah." I was like, "So what are you doing?" And he's like, just going to go try and find something to eat, try and find some breakfast. Didn't sleep much last night. I don't know if you heard the noise. There were some sketchy characters in the neighborhood here, and they kept messing with me and my friend as we were just trying to sleep over here in this far corner of the park, away from my building. And I was like, that sucks. Well, I hope you get some rest. And I said, I hope you find something to eat. And I gave him a couple suggestions about places in the neighborhood where I know he might be able to get some kind of stuff out the side, or that they might throw him a bone, proverbially speaking, and give him a cup of coffee or a Danish or donut or something like that, because I've talked to those business owners before, and I know that to be true. And so that was about it. And then I noticed, as I wasn't paying attention, I just went about my cleaning, and then I happened to look out the window as I was coming from the bedroom back here to the front room, and I looked out the window and I see he's picking up a bunch of the trash, which wasn't even his trash. Because I know for a fact who had left that trail of trash out there in the prior 2 to 3 days, and it wasn't him. But suddenly he was cleaning it up. And again, there are no more unhoused neighbors, no other people in the park, in this part of the park. It's just him and me. Probably, I'm 30 feet above him, and 20 feet away from him across the fence line in my apartment window. But literally, it's just the two of us, and he's picking it up. And he's cleaning his part of the park, and he's picking it up and he's walking it like halfway across the park to throw it in the trash. And then he's coming back and he's scooping stuff up, and he's coming back and he makes like 4 or 5 trips. And I looked down and I was like, "So, hey, what are you doing?" And he goes, "Nah, you know what? I just figured if you clean your apartment and take care of your space, like, I don't want to leave the park out here a mess that you got to look out at and that I got to walk through." He's like, "So I just figured I'd clean it up." And in that moment, I thought to myself, this is not a Rob, wow, you're so special story. This is just one example of 2 people who have 100 reasons to not talk to each other, right? And never understand each other and never share anything in our journey. 2 people just simply deciding to talk to each other. Frankly, him first, me second, and then us together for 2 minutes out of our lives. And my behavioral patterns and my choices positively influenced his behavioral patterns and his choices. And what does he wind up doing? He winds up doing something in a public space that makes him feel a little bit better about himself, and literally physically makes the park a more attractive, less messy place. Like, he cleans up for his neighbor's mess, not his own. His neighbors, his others in his community caused the problems, left it worse than it was, didn't look out for each other, didn't take care of the space, right? And he stepped in and did that. And in part, he said he was doing it because me, and in part, he said he was doing it because himself. Like, that's talking to each other, people. Like, I know it sounds oversimplified. I know it sounds super hyper obvious, but I'm telling you, in my coaching work, in my executive coaching work with entrepreneurs and business owners, in the management of our business, when our team runs, when Deanna, our show producer at Entrepreneurial Thinkers, and this show Stoppage Time, and I run into a wall on a topic or on something we're trying to get done, and I can sense she's not quite getting me, or she might sense that I'm not getting her, like, we'll stop each other and we'll talk and we'll jump into voice notes and we'll start talking live to make sure that we completely understand each other. That, like, okay, let's just triple check that we're on the same page, right? Anna Paula on our team as well and I thrive because we have once or twice a week 30 to 60-minute sessions on Zoom, even though she's in Portugal and I'm here in Los Angeles. Like, we literally almost couldn't be further apart and more different. She's 25, I'm 26, I'm 56, right? And yet we find we're able to get a lot done in the running of our business at Storytellers Company here because we talk, because we communicate, because we're clear about what our expectations are, right? In our communities, we have problems. In our nation, in our world, we have intractable issues. We have issues like homelessness. We have issues like housing inaffordability and inaccessibility, and the fact that we just have a housing supply problem. We have drug use, drug abuse, drug consumption problems, right? We have traffic problems. We have climate problems. We have educational deficiency problems. We have cultural disagreements and discord and problems with misunderstanding each other. We have many inequality, income inequality, right? We have all these major issues that face any functioning society of any size, right? And in the United States, we have these at the scale of like 300 plus million people spread across a massive geography. And yet we kind of retract to our corners and not talk to each other, or we will have these ridiculously naive and immature expectations related to how people in power, the people we elect or the people we just don't bother to vote for but just complain about when they're in office, like how they solve these intractable problems. You know why we have a housing? Let me give you some context on how patient you have to be to solve big, complicated problems in your life personally or in our kind of greater society. We have a housing, we have a homelessness problem essentially in the 2020s of the United States because of policies, both economic policies, and then a shift in how we slowed how we built new housing and how we became more restrictive about where we allowed new housing to build and what types of housing we would allow to be built in our neighborhoods, starting back in the 1980s. Right, so when I've lived long enough to have seen all this play out. So it's like I've been in the story and I've watched the story arc shift, and I now see that we are living in these chapters the results of the choices that were made by us and by others like us 40 years ago, right? And there are other problems that we face that were made policy-wise decades before that, right? We have a drug problem, a drug consumption problem in the United States, and therefore we have a drug import problem in the United States, but we have a drug import problem in the United States because we have a drug consumption problem in the United States, because we have a disposable income opportunity in the United States that allows us to purchase recreational and illegal drugs from sources outside the United States, right? So we contribute to our own problem, right? My unhoused neighbor friend here from our conversation the other day, in part lives on the streets because we have not built enough temporary shelters, we have not built enough housing, we have not built enough regular housing, and then therefore enough layer below it, affordable housing, and then therefore a layer below it, social governmental housing. And where we had that, which we did in the United States, basically for almost 100 years, we stripped it all out, we threw it all away, we got rid of it, we tore it down, and we believed that the private markets would just take care of it all, right? And we stopped talking to each other about these problems because it was easier if I'm just gonna move over here and I'm gonna put up a gate around my house and I'm not gonna have to worry about the rest of society's problems. That's somebody else's, right? And that's just ridiculous. Like the business scenarios that I've been describing this week, like these teammates could figure out how to work better together, how to help each other succeed, how to help the newest teammate to grow into the job if they would just fucking talk to each other, right? I can talk about politics with people who disagree with me. I can't talk about people who make up facts, right? Like, but I can talk about people who like, hey, I have a different policy view than you. Okay, fair enough. Like we can talk about that. We can understand, and we can even have areas where we kind of go, hey, you know what? It's better if we understand this about each other, and we don't talk about it in our personal friendship because it intoxicates too much of our friendship. That's fair enough. But those are like healthy boundaries. That's healthy communication, right? So, like politics has been on the mind because ultimately politics is not some nefarious faraway thing that controls all of us or that has doesn't have our own interests in mind, and we have to like begrudgingly participate in the system. Politics is essentially the art of communal discussion, conversation, and negotiation over the common shared interests of any group or community of people. That's politics. Like if you go to the Greek, Latin roots of the word, that is what politics is about. And so yes, I am a political junkie because I'm a conversationalist, because I'm a people person, because I'm a cultural anthropologist. I'm a person who studies and understands cultures and people and how we got here, right? And so I beg all of us in this summer of politics, right, to become more comfortable with simply discussing our views, not yelling and shouting and, you know, putting on our jersey and going to the stadium and putting down our beers and shouting at the opposing team, right? Not hooliganism, right? I'm saying like thoughtfully discuss our perspectives and our views on the major shared communal things that we're all living through. And in our businesses, it's the same way. In our personal relationships, it's the same way. I am in this apartment, and I took you on this tour of the apartment today, essentially to show you the proximity to like another part of my life. A different world is out here. I could say that park and those people that are unhoused, that are temporarily living in that park, seeking shelter in that park, under the shade of those trees on the hot summer days that we're living through, I could say that those people aren't my problem, right? I could say that if those people are assholes and idiots and it's their fault, right? But that's wouldn't be true. Like, it's not to say there aren't bad people amongst those people. Of course there are, but there are also bad people living inside this apartment complex, right? There are bad people in the companies that I consult with and work with. There are great people inside the companies that I consult with, right? Like, that's just human nature inside of any group of people. But I took it upon myself to say, like, yeah, I communicate with these people. Like, I interact with them. They are my neighbors. Literally, these are faces that I see in our neighborhoods all the time. And I say hello to them. And some say hello back to me, right? But I also showed you my apartment is empty because I have a very specific vision for what I want this apartment to look like and how I'm going to furnish it and how I'm going to settle into it. But I can't do it all at once. I literally can't afford to do it all at once, right? I'm a normal person. And so I'm taking my time to put this apartment together in the way that serves me, because I realize, like, in spite of my instinct to say I wanted it all moved in and all perfectly settled the weekend I moved in, like, that would have been naive and immature of me to believe that, right? So I had a conversation with myself about like the realistic, pragmatic approach to eventually furnishing my beautifully comfortable apartment, which, by the way, it's already beautifully comfortable, exactly as it is. I need not anything more, but I will eventually put more things in here because it'll make it more comfortable. It'll make it more representative of the house and the home that I want to live in and that I want to welcome people in and that I do my work in, right? But that takes time, right? It requires patience. The empty apartment is a metaphor for like the big empty problems that our society has, right? And the way we get to that is by patiently, thoughtfully thinking through, and then in community circumstances, talking to each other about how we make progress. So that's my rant for this week. It's been on my mind. It's been all that's been on my mind. I've got a book recommendation that looks back on history. It's called Adrift. It's by Professor Scott Galloway. I've referenced books from Scott previously. It's another book of his that I really enjoyed. It's called Adrift, and it looks back and it provides some historical context in the US from 1945 to the present in a simple distillation of 100 charts that talk about various parts of our societal structure, our infrastructure, kind of our social history, our political decision-making, our policies, our cultural evolution, etc., from 1945 to the present. And so it's looking at the last 75 to 80 years and saying, like, let's see how this can be instructive about where we might go in the next 50 to 100 years. And you all know that I obsess over the next 50 to 100 years. I am much more focused on and concerned about the world that I will leave behind when I leave this mortal earth here in the next 25 or 30 years than the world that I've lived in so far. And that's ultimately because I am hyper driven by progress. This book, Adrift, I think will give you like a nice, simple, light read, a simple template to understand some of the context of how we, quote unquote, got to where we are. I today just gave you a little bit of a knowledge bomb on snippets, tirade snippets of how we got to where we are. But I'm doing all this to just try and encourage you all to be comfortable with slowing down and thinking through the circumstances and the situations that you find yourself in, both in your personal relationships, in your professional relationships, in your businesses, as entrepreneurs or investors, and just as citizens of the world and citizens of your country or city or state, right? Like, slow down, talk to strangers, talk to your neighbors, talk to people with different views on the same issues as you, learn how to shape and find consensus, be patient, and ultimately focus on progress. Don't focus on individual wins. Don't focus on the zero-sum game nature of both business, which is what it's become about today, and culture, because it's a losing battle. Like, that is a losing game to play. Zero-sum games serve no one but the very, very few at the very, very top. And unless you're being disingenuous with yourself, you are not one of those very, very few at the very, very top. So anyways, that's my stoppage time. I had a lot to get out off my chest this week. Appreciate the rant, don't appreciate the rant, offer some comments, disagree with me, come at me with your particular perspective or opinions. I welcome it all. I love y'all. I wish you some joy, some love, some peace after my rants and my energy. I come at all this from a good space. I come at all this trying to create progress for all of us, for literally as many people as we can possibly scoop up from as many different ways of life as we can possibly scoop up. Like, I come at everything, even the passionate arguments that I make, from a point of view of progress. And I hope you all will do that as well. So happy Friday. We'll see you right back here next week.